Hello, and welcome to what I think, in fact, I'm sure, is a book or two to review 24. And today we are continuing our Roman theme because we started off with Roman conquests in 22. We then went to Rome's Great Eastern War in 23. And in 24 we have the Wars of Justinian by Michael Whitby. And I'm going to say this. Thank you very much, Pen and Sword, for sending me all these books. It's very kind of them. It means I don't have to buy them. I get sent them, and then all I ask is to review them. And I basically go, ones I like, I will talk about. Ones I don't like. What's the return address? So, if that answers anyone's questions about why do all the books you review you like? Because I think slamming someone on a video where they don't have a right for reply seems a bit cruel on their book. Saying how good the book is, yeah. So, for starters, Justinian. One of the cooler emperors, especially the later ones. There are some very cool color photos in here. Or color plates, rather. There are some wonderful maps, quite detailed, showing units and positions of him in his wars. And you start to realize very quickly that Justinian is not only just the last great conquering Roman emperor, he's the last true emperor in that he doesn't lead his own armies. He's an emperor. He doesn't need to lead his own armies. He has generals, Belisarius, Narcissus, and others to lead his armies for him. He's an emperor in the mold of an emperor. Not an emperor who needs to be out leading, fighting everywhere he goes. His job is to run the politics and keep and provide a steady hand on the tiller. He doesn't need to fight. He's secure enough in his position. He doesn't need to fight and go and be going for personal glory. And he enjoys politics enough he can deal with it. So, the book starts out with Chapter 1, Justinian, Man and Ruler. Chapter 2, State of the Nation. Chapter 3, Sources. Chapter 4, 6th Century Army. Chapter 5, Persian Wars. Chapter 6, Reconquest of Africa. Chapter 7, the Italian Campaigns. Chapter 8, the Balkans. And Chapter 9, Internal Challenges, before it gets to a conclusion with a glossary, bibliography, and index. This is £25 in the UK and apparently $34.95 in the US, according to the back of the jacket prices. And the chapter in this that really spoke to me most, other than the one about Justinian himself, is the one about a 6th century army, because okay, whenever I go into teaching people about the Roman army, they are obsessed with the army of the early empire, of the early imperial era, or the late republican army. They are obsessed with this high point of legions in their ideas. And you sit there and go, but the Roman army evolved, and one of the things that made it so successful was its evolutions. Sometimes the evolutions were terrible. Sometimes they really were, but sometimes they were quite good, and the 6th century army is a good example of this. Thanks to the survival of extensive contemporary narrative histories, as well as imperial legislation, we are reasonably well informed about the nature and operation of Justinian's military forces. A contrast with the situation in the preceding century, when the evolution from the 4th century Roman army is still unknown, through Arminius Marcellinus, the Notija Digitum, and the Thessalian the Code is unclear. The Odesian Code is unclear. That is not to say that there are no uncertainties or disagreements about some key matters. For example, the balance between types of forces, whether central versus local, infantry or cavalry, Roman as opposed to non-Roman, and about recruitment. There is a popular perception that Roman armies underwent an inexorable change from infantry legions of the Republic and the early Empire towards the heavy cavalry of the medieval world, with the balance already having already shifted by the 6th century. It is also believed that local troops declined to the status of part-time soldier farmers, and that non-Romans provided mostly effective troops. All these views will be questioned. There is an issue of terminology, since Prosopius and his successors as historians deliberately avoided technical language, so that troops and units are often referred to by non-specific terms, such as stratiothoriai, soldiers, rather than by the actual type of their unit, whether that was arithmos or neros. Furthermore, Prosopius did not always record everything that he knew. Thus, in describing Narcissus' disposition at Busta Gallorum, he notes that 8,000 archers were placed on the wings, with 1,500 cavalry placed at the angle of the left wing. But he does not provide figures for the troops commanded by Narcissus and Valerian on the wings, or for the dismounted Lombards, Hercules, and other non-Romans in the centre, just as he recorded that 50 infantry had occupied a tactically important hill in advance of the battle. So for the battle, he provided numbers for the elements that would be important in the subsequent fighting, but not for the rest of the army. It is frustrating that Prosopius could easily have provided us more specific information, but we have to work with what we are given. Whether you're a historian or a military going to war, you have to work with what you've been given, not what you wanted or what you would desire. Me, I'd like a one-to-one interview with Admiral Henderson. That ain't going to happen anytime soon. He's been unfortunately dead for 80 plus years. At Justinian's accession, the empire's armies were divided between 5 major commands. The 2 Magisteri Militarum Parastellis, whose troops were based in the vicinity of Constantinople, on either side of the Bosphorus, so that their commanders were in the presence of the emperor, and 3 regional magistri for Illyricum, Thrace, and the East, Orients. In 528, the last of these commands, the massive Orients, was subdivided when a new magister was created for Armenia and Lazikia, the northeastern sector of the frontier from the Tigris headwater to the Black Sea. The long walls of Constantinople were under the authority of a deputy, vicar, of the European Praetorius, but Justinian found that this officer devoted most energy to competing with the vicar of the Praetorian prefect, who was responsible for civilian matters in the area. So that in 535 he allocated the combined duties to a praetor. In due course, reconquered lands in the west were placed under Magistry for Africa, Italy, and Spain. The supernumerary title of Magister Militarum Vacans was used to give individuals increased authority for particular operations. The provinces under the authority of the regional magistri were commanded by duces, the origin of the word duke. Though Egypt and some central Anatolian provinces were under a comes re militaris. Justinian's reorganization of the Armenian frontier resulted in the number of dukes in the east being increased from 7 to 11, while new ones were created for Africa. The distributions of units under these commanders can be inferred, to an extent, from the Notia Digitarum, a late 4th century official list that includes the locations of different types of military units throughout the empire. Its evidence is not straightforward, since the list underwent various updatings in the early 5th century. Also, even in their latest version, they antedate Justinian by a century, during which time some new units were established, although most existing ones continued to operate. In particular, Justinian himself was responsible for creating several new units, often as a result of successful campaigns in which prisoners were taken. For example, the Numerii Istaniae, a unit of Berbers from Africa, which is recorded in Egypt. The Equites Perseo Justinian, created from the former garrison of Cicerone, who served in Italy. The Prima Felicius Istaniae, who are founded in Africa, or the Istanian Vanloi, who fought the Persians in the 540s, all units being deployed at some remote move from their point of origin. The Notia does, however, highlight the importance of the distinction between central Palatine units and local provincial ones, and also gives a broader indication of how the troops under command of, say, the per Ordinarium were distributed in the provinces and cities under the command of its subordinate dukes. Categories of troops. The army of the 4th century had been divided into 2 broad categories. The comitatenses, which were mobile forces that accompanied emperors on the campaign and so might be switched from the Rhine frontier to the Euphrates, and garrison troops, commanded by a duke and assigned to particular provinces or cities. The latter are most often referred to, at least by modern scholars, as limitaniae. Though in the sources they are also called Vaganiae, Castaniae, or Rapenses. The commandantes enjoyed superior conditions, possibly because, while visibility to the emperor could bring rewards for distinguished service, the mobility this entailed was not necessarily popular, and the more static limantii had greater opportunities for securing local economic benefits. On occasions, units were moved from one category to another, with the limantii becoming pseudo-commandantes or commandantes losing their superior pay and materials, e.g. extra horses, although the switch was not always recorded with a formal change of title. This basic division of soldiers, straturiae, persisted into the 6th century, although the commandantes, sometimes referred to as categolae from the registers that underpinned recruitment, can now be split into two categories: those who served in the praetorial armies and were based near the capital, palantae, and those commanded by the regional magistrae. The latter were no longer fully mobile, with their field of operation normally restricted to the region commanded by their magister. They might be stationed with limantii, as when Justinian strengthened Palmyra, and then they regularly fought alongside the frontier troops. One important aspect of the limantii is that part of their pay had been replaced by a grant of land. Use produce and revenues provided for the needs of the soldiers and their families. This, along with the fact that they did not enjoy all the legal privileges of commandantes, has led to them being dismissed as no more than part-time second-class soldier farmers. In a secret history, Prosopius claimed that Justinian devalued them by allowing the pay of those on the eastern frontier to fall into arrears by 4 or 5 years, and then forcing them to forego their pay altogether when peace was made with the Persians, so that he removed from them the very name of soldiers. The assertions of the secret history have to be treated with caution, and this evidence is open to other interpretations. Ownership of property did not make a soldier an amateur. Under the Republic, ownership of property had been the key qualification for the privilege of serving in the armies that conquered the Mediterranean. It did not entail that the genuine farmer worker, not entail that the owner actually did all, or even very much, of the work on his land. Even genuine farmer workers could have some military value, as the mobilization of peasant militias in Lithuania in 547 and Totila's actions to counter Roman success demonstrate. Prosopius' critique of Justinian undoubtedly contains exaggerations, and it's possible that the produce from the land allocations of limantii was intended to cover living expenses in peacetime, with payment only made for service away from their base. At any rate, it is clear that Justinian valued limantii sufficiently to re-establish their deployment in Africa after the Vandal conquest with the allocation of land to cultivate. Justinian's code also incorporated the provisions of the Theodosian Code related to the training and monitoring of limantii, which suggests that he expected them to be capable of fighting. The numerous sieges during the Persian Wars will have involved some limantii in the defense of their cities, including their own families and properties, often successfully. Later in the century, the 4th Parthenian Legion, a unit of limantii stationed in Syria, according to the Notitia, fought at the Battle of Solicum, 586, where one of its members had distinguished himself for valour, and the unit stationed at Asmus on the Danube frontier was so impressive that an unsuccessful attempt was made to incorporate it into the mobile army. Finally, Egyptian evidence from the end of the 6th century reveals that service in units of limantii was a hereditary privilege, which recruits were prepared to pay, so Justinian had not destroyed their credibility. Since the fighting ability of the limantii was assumed to be inferior, the co-location with them of commandances has been taken as a sign that the quality of the latter had also declined. However, the arrangement for reconquered Africa revealed that limantii were envisaged as the front line of the provincial defence, with the commandances being held in reserve to offer support where needed. This was how Roman frontiers had been defended for over 200 years, and for the strategy to work as well as it did, under most circumstances, the frontline troops had to be good enough to hold up enemy invasions, while the backup troops being assembled from regional bases also had to be effective. Another argument used to assert a decline in quality of Roman soldiers is the prominence of non-Roman troops in the narratives of warfare. This has contributed to the belief that these barbarians were the most effective units in the 6th century armies, and indeed came to constitute the bulk of Roman forces, with negative consequences for discipline, reliability, and ethos. In part, this is a question of context, since the expeditionary forces used to recover Africa and Italy were bound to contain significant elements that had been enrolled specifically for that mission, alongside contingents from eastern armies that had been reassigned to the venture. The new units will undoubtedly have been recruited on the basis of quality as well as their specialist skills. Since horse archery was prized as a tactical advantage over Gothic lancers, there will be numerous Hunnic troops, and these were likely to be used as prominently in battle. It is also possible that, just as in the Republic and early Empire, non-citizen units, auxilia, played important roles in battle and suffered heavier casualties than citizen legionaries, generals in the 6th century placed non-Roman units in positions of particular danger. The traditional way to enlist non-Roman troops in late antiquity was as federates. These functioned as ethnic units under leadership of their own chief, and might range in size from a few hundred to a major warband of 10,000. For example, the Goths, who followed the two Theodorics in the Balkans in the 470s, who in theory became Roman soldiers when their leader was granted the title of Magister Militarum. Such foreign units continue to exist in the Justinianic army. For example, the Huns and Lombards, who served in Africa and Italy, although they are now termed Sumakoi allies, Prosipius comments that the nature of Federate service had changed so that anyone could be enrolled in these units, although he provides no further details. He records Romans as commanders of the Federate unit, which does represent a change from earlier practice. At some point in the 6th century, the Federates were reorganized into their own Moira brigade under the Comes Feudatorum, who was first securely attested in 546. It is possible that the blurring of distinctions between federates and regulars occurred as a result of the settlement of tribal groups within the empire in return for military service. As for example, the Heruls had been located near Signum on the Danube, or the Lombards further upstream. The Heruls often served as allies under their own leader, for the example, Fulvixius and Philon, who led Herul contingents in Italy. But Prosipius comments that some of the Heruls had even become Roman soldiers enlisted among the federates, and some of their commanders have Roman names. The conquered Vandals were moved from Africa to be enrolled for service in Justinian's eastern walls in 5 cavalry units of Lusitaniae Vandalae. There were also, undoubtedly, some individual non-Roman volunteers, though these might most often have been listed in the private retinues of individual commanders, or been men of high status who became officers, like the Persian Aretius. I could quite easily read it all night. This is a good book. It's complicated. Basically, that's the answer for most of these questions in life. Whenever a historian, anyone, gives you an easy answer, it's probably the wrong answer. Not much in life is simple. Not much life in life is easy. Iron brew is great for those who like it. It's terrible for those who don't. That's an easy question. But iron brew is a very easy thing. Whether you give up the ghost of your old mouse that your grandfather gave you when you were about 12 years old and replace it with a newer mouse, because its wheel's starting to go, but it works otherwise quite well, but the wheel is starting to chip off and all the runners underneath have gone, so it doesn't move smoothly anymore, it's a bit juddery. That's a tough one, because that's emotional. And that's just over a mouse. When you're talking about operations involving allies, they are often going to be problematic because they will have their own command structures. They will be different. They will be specialists in their own way, skilled in their own way, and you have to make allowances for that. But they also might have different rules of engagement. This has been a problem for many, many recent conflicts. Rules of engagement. Because surely everyone should be operating according to the same rules. Surely. They're allies. But the reality is that's not the case. Culture, that can be a factor. But also, and more often, so can politics and the reasons for being at the table or in the conflict in the first place. Are you there because you have skin in the game? Or are you there because your biggest ally needed help and you want to earn some favour? But you want to do it at minimal cost to yourselves. A good book. Michael Whitby. There is a link and also the ISBN down below. Hope you enjoy it. And one more thing before I finish this, and I'm going to try and keep this less than 20 minutes. For those who are wondering, this is supposed to be Justinian. Take care. Thank you for watching.